much. This is my first time recording a Zoom call, so I may be a little, I may have a little trouble with it. Um, Now that we are recording, I do have to ask you, this call is being recorded. Do you consent to me asking you some questions, recording your answers, and then later transcribing them for this school project?
Yes, that is fine.
Thank you much. Uh, so, let's begin the interview then, I suppose. On your Atembis article, it says that you found your true calling in the field of psychology. What was this like aha moment for you? Or what was the sort of like revelation you had that made you go into this field?
Um, I originally was going to be a nurse. We're in Dateline here. I'm old, so this is 1978 that I went to college to become a nurse.
Good
Um,
year.
After 1 year, I didn't do well in chemistry and organic chemistry, so I went into business administration. But while I was doing the business administration major, I wanted to be in human resources. And I got to take some psychology courses. And the minute that I had taken a psychology course, I was like, wow, I really, really like this. But I didn't really know that psychology, psychologists, counseling, I come from a small town. I didn't know that these things actually existed as professions. So I just continued on taking many psychology and social work courses, got my degree in business, and then 10 years later, when I was divorcing and stay at home mom and trying to decide what to do with my life now, I decided on um, trying to go back to school. And by that time, I knew that counseling existed. I had been in counseling by that time, personally been in counseling. And I got to my very first counseling course and I felt at home. For the first time ever, I felt like I belonged. And it was that aha moment that was, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that like finding something new turned out to be like your calling. That's a great feeling, you know?
It is.
Yeah. So actually, this is not an interview question, but I'm actually curious. What's Nichols, Washington like, or Wisconsin? Wisconsin. What's Nichols,
Nichols,
Wisconsin like?
Wisconsin is a town of under 200 people.
Hmm.
It is a very tiny village. And if you can imagine, like Mayberry RFD actually existing without Andy Griffith there, or
Oh my gosh.
that is that is Nichols. So it had three streets going one way. It has three streets going one way, four going the other. My parents owned the bank. My grandfather had actually started it back in 1917.
Oh, wow.
My parents owned the bank until they passed away, and now it's sold to some conglomerate, Dairyman's or something. I don't know. There's so that was on Main Street, and then there's a little post office on Main Street right next to it, and then across the street you had the grocery store and the barber shop, which was about this big, and a bar and a laundromat. It was just it's a tiny community, and the streets behind it, the main street had houses. And then there used to be a school. When I lived there, there was a school. They have closed that school and they bus everybody now to a bigger city. But
Hmm.
we really had actually a 3-room schoolhouse. So the grades, we didn't have enough kids for one grade. So they put grades together. So first and second was together, third and fourth was together, fifth and sixth was together. Yeah.
You said Andy Griffith wasn't there. I hope Don Knotts was still there.
No.
Dang. Dang.
No Andy, no Don.
Dang. That was my favorite. Okay, back to the professional questions, as it were.
Okay.
So, you say you worked with at-risk youth in the school system, particularly students with mood disorders and on the autism spectrum. When you say at risk, what risks particularly can you say they faced?
So their risks are of not being able to complete school, of failing, and therefore they become more at risk for drug and alcohol use, for criminal activity, or for homelessness. Um, they are also typically bullied at school. because especially those on the autism spectrum
Yes.
don't necessarily understand the social cues. So they get bullied and picked on a lot. They get used a lot of times because they think that somebody is their friend. And those kids who are not as trustworthy and as nice will put them in very awkward situations, get them in trouble. The kids with mood disorders often act out um, not because they want to, but because their mood is unstable and they don't have the ability to stop themselves from having some kind of a meltdown, some kind of just an acting out, an outburst. And so then they end up um, getting suspended because they've hurt something, someone, maybe themselves. There's such a high risk for the mood disorders of self-injury, so these kids have all kinds of risks in their life of being able to be successful, to fit in, to move forward.
Hmm.
It's very difficult for them.
I imagine so. And you being their psychiatrist, I imagine you have your work, for lack of a better term, cut out for you.
I am not a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor. I'm a doctorate level professional counselor. So I did
Professional
not,
counselor.
right. So I stayed as a professional counselor so that I could teach Masters of Counseling students because you need to be a professional counselor to do that. But I got to have a doctorate degree.
My mistake, my mistake.
That's okay.
I also read, I believe on your bio, you are a psychometrist. Psychometrist? How do you pronounce it?
So when I first came out of grad school and had my degree, I worked for a psychologist and a neurologist in Sun City, West Arizona, that they worked just with the geriatric population. And one of the things they did was a lot of testing. So yes, I was their psychometrist, which meant I did their testing for general intelligence, cognitive functions, memory. That was what we were really looking for, was memory decline, that type of thing.
A psychometrist.
Mhm.
Interesting, interesting. So, you answered that question actually in the last one. Thank you. You say you wrote a psychological therapeutic program for
I
a
did.
group of youth, for this group of youth to enhance self-esteem, lower their negative behaviors, and improve their social skills. Would you mind maybe sharing the process you had of creating it? What elements you decided were important to leave in it? What just would you mind walking me through that process a little bit?
Sure. Um, so it was my doctorate dissertation, and that was the reason for having such a large program. But my motivation behind it is that my son actually was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when he was 6 and autism spectrum disorder when he was 10. So he was in the school system as a special needs child with nothing being provided. Every place I looked, they didn't have anything provided. And
Yeah.
I started seeing, because I was a school counselor at the time, I started seeing how many other children also had many of these same symptoms, and they were in special education, but there were no programs to help them learn how to manage. They could go to counseling, but I felt like they needed something more, and I couldn't find any programs. So I began researching to see if there were programs anywhere that worked with these kids outside of medication. You know, what about how they see themselves? What about how they interact with others? How they get along at school? Like, medication can't fix all that. So
Mhm.
what are we doing in order to help that? I found one program that was being tested, researched in Chicago, Illinois. So I wrote to she was a psychiatrist. I wrote to the researching psychiatrist, and she invited me to look at her program. And I basically took a lot of her things and said, okay, I'm going to try and see what would happen if we did this in the school system with our kiddos who have these disabilities, who are considered to be highly mood disordered or emotionally disabled. And because our special education system usually has kids together who are emotionally disabled, and at that point, at least autism spectrum was in there a lot of times too. So it kind of got to be a little bit of a mixed bag because they all have emotional disorders.
Hmm.
So I was looking for what is it that I felt these kids needed. As a mom, I could tell you what my child needed. And as a school counselor, I could see what the other kids needed the same thing. They needed to feel better about themselves. And I really believed, and my background research showed me that these kids never feel good about themselves because they're always getting the message that they aren't good enough, that they don't fit in, and that they are different. So that's very important to children to not feel that way. It's
Exactly.
important
Yeah.
for kids to fit in. So my first thing was I wanted to look at what would happen if we would be able to help them feel like they fit in, at least within their own little group,
Of
and
course.
to feel better about themselves. So that was one thing. I was looking at then, okay, if they felt better about themselves and if they fit in, how would that change how they act in class?
Okay.
So my hope and my curiosity was if they felt better about themselves and they fit in, would they be more able to function in class? The problem I had with that was they're not trying not to function in class. There's
Yeah.
something wrong with their brain. That's how. So I thought, well, we try as counselors all the time to give them coping skills, but they kind of don't want to do the coping skills because it's like, oh, you're telling me what to do again. So I was kind of backpedaling with that. And I came up with the idea that if we made these coping skills more fun, and if they understood why we were doing it, not just so that they could do better in school, but maybe at a different level, perhaps they would be more willing to try.
Yeah.
So my program then took on these pieces. Let's help them build some self-esteem, help them to fit in. Let's give them some education at their level, because they're only like 9, 10, 11, 12-year olds. Let's at their level, let's explain what's going on with their brain. And then let's see if they will use some of the coping skills, especially if we make the coping skills more fun. And if we could do those three things, then would they have better performance in school and behave? Would their behaviors improve?
Yes.
So that was how I designed the program, was with that in mind. That took me a year basically to get through all of the research and everything to get it designed. And then because I was working with kids and I was studying them and I was taking in information and I was going to be publishing that information, I had to go through what's called the IRB. So if you're doing research, you have to have it approved by a body of people who look at your research and say, are you going to harm anybody in doing this? What are the risks involved?
Such as an
Right.
ethics board, perhaps.
Yes. Right. It's called the IRB is what it's called.
IRB.
Um, so the IRB board, the review board,
Okay.
said, okay, it's fine. You're not going to harm anybody. You're revealing your risks and everything else. All the parents had to sign, whatever. So then I decided I wanted to test in a couple of different school districts at different times of the year because I wanted to see, did it make a difference where the children were located,
Interesting.
what school district, and did it make a difference between if it was in the fall, the winter, or the spring? So did the school calendar make any difference in how well this program would work? So I
Interesting.
found 3 different school districts, 3 different times of the year, but I did the same 12-week program where I went into the schools twice a week, and did a group therapy, did this program basically in the self-contained classroom. And I did a pre-test with the children before we ever started to find out where is their self-esteem. And I had the teachers and parents fill out some child behavioral checklists, so I knew what their behaviors were like. And then after they did the 12 weeks, and then I waited another month after that and would go back in and do the same test again to see were there any improvements.
I am actually curious, if I may ask, where are these school districts, or where were they?
So one of the school districts is in Maricopa, Arizona, which is 25 miles south of Chandler.
Yes, that's
Another
where
was
I'm from
Avondale,
originally.
and then Avondale, Arizona was
Okay.
another one, and another one in Goodyear, Arizona.
Oh, hey, represent. So fairly local schools.
Yes.
And what positive data, for lack of a better word, did you gather from these initial 3 schools? What negative data? What worked? What didn't? What? I'm going to ask you a few more questions about the program, if that's all right. I thought that was very fascinating.
Sure.
What sort of, like, after taking it to the first few schools, trying it out, how'd it go? What worked? What didn't? Going forward, what did you think?
So good questions.
Thank you.
So what went very, very well were the teachers were super receptive to my
Nice.
coming into the classroom. And the kids had fun.
Nice.
The kids were really they really enjoyed it. We did fun things. So the program itself, I went in and I met with each student to just do this self-test first, explain the program to them. So that part we did. And then we had fun. The first week, what we did was took their name and did like an acrostic with their name. And they had to find words to describe themselves, for each letter of their name. And I had lots of different words so that they didn't have to think too hard. They had multitudes of words that they could pick from, and they could use their own too. But then what I did was, instead of just having that, is I quickly would take their name and their words and I put it into a little paragraph, like a story.
Oh
There
my
was a little
gosh.
story. So if it was Sam, and you said, well, my name, you'd say the S is for
Super.
silly.
Silly. Perfect. Perfect.
And the A is for you like art, and the M is you like music. I would say, okay, I wanted to introduce Sam. Sam is our silly, artistic, musical guy, and group welcome Sam, and everybody would clap. Okay, let's think about 9 and 10-year-olds. You have somebody clapping for you, and somebody's just said your name and introduced you, and the whole group clapped. Of course, you're going to feel good, right?
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be awesome. They wanted to do their last names after that because they were like,
gosh.
let's do it again. So it was great. And I actually, as a side note, I had kids see me in the grocery store a year later and say, Dr. Sheila, or, well, I wasn't a doctor at that time, so it was Miss Sheila, but Miss Sheila, do you remember me? I'm so-and-so, and go through what their name meant.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness, and that was way before the pandemic, so we could hug. I'm hugging these kiddos in a grocery store because that stuck with them.
That's so sweet.
Stuck with them. So that was the first week, the first meeting. And then most every week we started out with using some Play-Doh. Actually, it was a different form of Play-Doh that didn't crumble quite so badly. And they could make mood monsters. So I'd say, what's your mood today? While we're waiting for everybody to get settled in, have some of this, and it was clay-like stuff, and make your mood monster. And whatever it is that your mood is telling you today. And so they had all kinds of strange things. objects, and then they would get to go around and they get to show their object and tell us their mood. So it made them feel cohesive. It made them feel it was safe, and it was an object, plus it gave them something to do with their hands. So
Exactly.
that was really big for them.
Huh.
Then I did an activity where I had gotten a picture, a functional MRI. So you know an MRI takes a picture of the brain, but a
Yes.
functional MRI is actually a colored picture, basically, and it shows brain activity. So where it's blue and green and yellow, there you got some activity, that part of your brain. If it's black, there's no activity. And if it's red, you're getting overheated. You got too much activity.
Eek.
So I had the National Institute of Mental Health provided me with these functional MRI pictures of a bipolar brain, of a depressed brain, of a normal brain, of a couple different ones. So I picked out the depressed, the bipolar, and the normal. And I just did the normal, and I called it the moody brain and the sad brain. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. All I had to do is put up the pictures and say, what do you see the difference? Well, that one has this, and that one has this, and that one. Like, that one has a lot of red spots in it. I'm like, yeah, that's the moody brain. That's kind of what you guys have, is the moody brain. And then they're like, it's like red hots. So now I just go with their terms. They're no, whatever they say, I just pick up their language.
There we go. Smart.
So red hots. Well, what do you think that's like? Well, when I get red hots in my brain, I want to go and scream, or I want to punch my sister, or I want to tip over my desk, or I want to hit my parents, or whatever. They can say whatever they want to.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so it's the red hots in your brain. Can you control those red hots? Well, it doesn't feel like it. So we talked about feeling like somebody else had a remote control for your brain. But basically the idea was to help kids understand that they had something going on in their brain that they truly couldn't change. And they weren't trying to put it there, but it separated that from their behavior. So I didn't want them to think, well, I don't have any control over this, but I did want them to know this isn't about you, it's about your brain. And so once they did that, once they understood, hey, it's about my brain. Okay, well, how are we going to tame your brain? We have mood monsters that we can tell what our mood is. If that was real, we would try to tame the monster. Well, how do we tame our brain? And that was the bridge from getting them to understand, okay, I now want to do some coping skills. Now I want to learn some ways to do this, because it's not just about somebody telling me yet again something else I have to do. So that was my buy-in, and it worked. They really wanted to learn some of the coping skills. They wanted to learn how to think differently, how to manage their moods differently. And we had all kinds of different things, from looking at automatic negative thoughts, which are ants, ANTS. So we cut out big ant things, and we put messages on them, and we got up and we'd stomp them all down and jump on them and everything. And then we had to create new ones. So we created new animals. I called them pets. These were my words. Pets, a positive emotional.
Gosh.
But so it was, pick an animal. What's your favorite animal? How are you like that animal? And kind of the whole, connecting them to something different. So all of these different things that they then could use, and they could use it when they were talking with each other, when they were at home, when they were in the classroom. And the outcome really was that, first of all, my research showed that overall, with the students that participated in this program across the board, all three schools, and all throughout the year, on average, had an increase of 45% in their self-esteem scores.
That is fantastic.
So they really went up in self-esteem scores. Their ability to react positively in the classroom. So their attention seeking and rule breaking behavior overall went down. and their grade. So a lot of them aren't in the special education classroom, didn't necessarily have a problem with their letter grades. Their letter grades are fine. They're smart kids, but their behaviors
Yes.
changed, and their behaviors were more positive overall. The negative behaviors went down, and the only thing that we didn't see a huge difference was those that not every child had destructive behavior. Not every child was like self-destructive or tried to destroy schools or anything like that. But those who did, um, the few that were that way, my program didn't do anything for them. Like there's that one or two kids that just are unable to control anything and would cut on themselves or would um, do something really destructive, like
Yes.
really violent. My program did not do anything for them overall. However, it did for everybody else in that group.
Not do anything for lack of trying, like, or not lack of trying, that was unprofessional. Not do anything like they were in the program and it just didn't work for them, or they were not included in the program, either or.
They were included in the program, and they did participate. And overall, I think they benefited from it at some level,
Okay.
but their level of impairment and their tendency towards violence was they still had violent behavior after.
It would need a different sort of program.
They would need probably medication and some other kind of program.
Okay.
And because it was a cross categorical, I could talk, because it's a cross categorical emotionally disabled classrooms, there really wasn't a way of saying, well, it's only these kids that have an emotional disorder that looks like bipolar disorder or severe mood disorders, and these kids are behavioral. They're all together. So I don't know that those kids that were the program didn't work actually had the same kind of mood disorder. I had no way of knowing that because we were looking at symptoms.
Okay.
And so diagnoses, I didn't go by what the doctor diagnosed them as. Some of them haven't even seen a psychiatrist or had not been diagnosed. I didn't want to just I didn't want to take just those kids. I wanted to do this in the schools with kids who are in an emotionally disabled classroom because their emotions were out of control.
Yes.
Why their emotions are out of control could be a couple different reasons. And my guess is that those who did not respond well to the program were more on the behavioral disabilities that probably comes from a different kind of background of trauma or something else going on. And the kids who did well probably came from the group that actually have the brain biological mood disorders, such as the precursor to bipolar disorder or severe depression or something like that.
Interesting. And I'm on my last few questions, actually. So, out of the 3 locations that you had your program at, which was Goodyear, Avondale, and a third one that was 25 miles south of Chandler,
Called Maricopa. Uh-huh.
Maricopa. There we go. There we go. I'm from Maricopa. You'd think I'd remember. Did any of the schools display more success over the other? If so, do you think there may be a reason for as such? Do you think there could be like the floor to you? Were there any that had a better or worse response for the initial program?
Um,
I can restructure that question if that's a word.
no, I'm thinking back. Um, the probably the highest success was in Maricopa. And I think that part of the reason was that overall their classroom structure had more aides. So they actually were getting this reinforced in between more often because the aides stayed in the room when I was doing the actual group. So the aides were there and picking up on it. So the aides were reinforcing it for me with just because it was working and they liked it and it was fun. They did it.
Awesome.
Avondale and Goodyear has the least amount, especially back at this time that I was doing this, they really didn't have the same amount of resources. So Goodyear, their teacher was absolutely awesome. And she was always emailing me, hey, can we have some more of this? Do you have any more Mundo so I can having them do, these mood monsters. They really like it. It really helps them. Do you have any more pictures of this? So she was awesome. Her group in and of itself did well. The Avondale had, I think, more of our behavioral kids, and they were a little bit older. They were more like 12, 13 years old instead of the 9, 10, 11-year-olds. So they were, although overall it was for 9 to 14-year-olds, the older kids didn't take to it as well as the younger kids. And that may have just been more years of being in the system, more years of feeling badly. But I also think, again, I think we have some behavioral disorders. So the school itself in Avondale was more in the downtown area. It was more in the area of higher crime. So I'm not sure what all constituted their students being in that program.
Okay. Seems like the mood monsters were really popular.
They were super popular. And of course, I use the name acrostic, which was super popular since then. In anytime I work with kids, and probably every student that I've had as an intern, I've taught how to use the acrostic and mood monsters. So, Mundo, which is like a Play-Doh, and acrostics with names, and we have used them over and over and over and over again in individual counseling, in small group counseling. My students all use it in their counseling. So.
Fascinating. I'm actually on my final question, and this isn't so much asking your experiences, so much as asking your thoughts on things. In this COVID era of online schooling, do you think it disproportionately affects students with mood or behavioral disorders in any positive or negative way?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. So first of all, the older kids that are on the autism spectrum probably do just fine, maybe even a little better with the online school, because they don't have everything coming in as far as their crowds around them.
Yes.
So they actually don't do too badly. Everyone else, especially with the mood disorders, they really need to be in a structured environment. Home is great, except home also, it's hard for them to have school at home. Home is where I play. Home is where I watch TV. Home is where I talk to my parents. Home is where I have my room. Home is where I do this activity. And they have a hard time generalizing that school can be done at home, or that home things could be done at school. That their brain really wants to silo the two. I have school and I have home. So when we have to have school at home, they're like, no, can't do that. They also really need to have the routine and the structure that includes some of the other therapies, which many times is occupational therapy, speech therapy, and just some of the behavioral things that happen within the group in their classrooms. Those are really positive for them, that's healthier for them. So it's really hard when we're stuck at home, and it's hard on the parents. It was much easier to be a school counselor and a agency counselor and work with these kids in my office for an hour or two than to come home. And I love my son, and he is actually at CCC now. He's in a science major there and doing quite well, but he's also in his 20s now. So we got past that 9 and 10-year-old age. It was hard. It was hard to have that. Would have been horrible to have that all day long with the 0 breaks, and you're doing everything for them. So I'm like, oh my gosh, these poor parents, I can only imagine. And I have talked to some of them who literally quit jobs to homeschool during this time because they couldn't manage online working and trying to teach their special needs child, their mood disordered child at the same time. So they literally stopped working
Damn.
and just did this. And you have to have respite. You have to have people coming in. So COVID, this year with COVID has been devastating for those kids. It's been devastating overall. I have more child clients coming into Atembis than I've ever had. And the mild mood disorders are now major mood disorders. So no, they don't have bipolar disorder because of COVID, but they have deep depression and deep anxiety, and they feel so isolated, and it is devastating for these kids.
Heartbreaking. Dang. I'm sorry to end the interview with a sad question.
That's okay.
To completely turn the mood around, I've been sitting on this the whole interview. I love those tiny houses in your background. I think they're adorable.
So a fun fact about Sheila, 10 years ago or so, maybe even more, I started having a Christmas village, and it started out very small. Every year it grew. This year, because I started working from home and it was COVID and I wasn't going anyplace, when I was cleaning up my Christmas village, I noticed that there were a few houses that didn't have a Christmas theme, a few buildings. So I took everything down and I recreated a small version of my Christmas village and then I ordered online green, you can't probably see it, but instead of sitting on snow, they're sitting on what looks like green grass. And I ordered new trees. And I ordered a bunch of new stuff so I could have my little village behind me.
Oh my gosh, that is adorable. That is fascinating. I didn't know that.
So it's about 12 houses that come from a Christmas village that I have, which has hundreds, but about 12 not houses, businesses. So it's a garden shop and a cheese factory and a wine and cheese shop and a creperie, a winery, a jewelry store, the Waffle House, Mimi's Cafe, a grilled cheese place, a booksellers that looks a lot like a Barnes and Nobles type of thing. And then it goes a little bit down this way, which you can't see, but there's a bait shop and a restaurant. Yes, so I have water. I don't think I can. Oh yeah, I can.
Oh, that is awesome.
So you can see I have my little water over there and stuff.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. Well, I must say that is all the questions I had for the interview. I'm going to end the recording now. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
You're welcome.
I do hope you have a good day. I
You
will end
too.
the interview now, or the recording now, if I can find the button. There we go.